Welcome back to Aquarium 911, where I help you with your aquarium problems. Today, we're going to be going into a different version of a STEM problem that might kind of take us back to some of the other issues we've dealt with before, but I think there's a kind of important experimentation that is going on from our emailer. So let's go ahead and get into the email, and we'll walk through the steps that I would take to try and solve this problem. Today's email is from D. I tried to condense my first draft to save you some time, and hopefully I still have all the relevant info. The detail's okay, don't worry about that. I'm going to include some images. I did a hard reset of my tank running since 2018. The initial reset was around 7 months ago, and then again around 2 months ago. The old filter/media and some of the old substrate kept for cycle preservation. Main tank is a 29 gallon using an AquaClear 50 hang on the back filter. Previously was using the Nightcrew Classic LED Plus, but swapped to the Aquarium Co-op Light as of 3 weeks ago. Substrate is a mix of Fluval Stratum and Echo Complete. Fertilizers, we're using Easy Green and Easy Root tabs when needed. pH is somewhere between 7 and 7.5. That kind of concerns me. I know who you are, which means you're local to me. And I know that our water's a little wonky and we don't really have a lot of carbon hardness in our water, so that can cause some fluctuations in pH. But often when we see problems with plants, one of the things we should look at is things like fluctuations like that, right? Plants in general want kind of stable water parameters. So if we are seeing this big up and down shift constantly, that usually pisses off a number of different species, especially like crypts. Crypts tend to not like that, but we'll dig in a little deeper. Nitrate, 40 to 50 ppm, temperature at 78.5, and then there's a control tank. So we're doing two tanks side by side, we're doing this experiment. My concern here is that we're missing some relevant info. What's my general hardness? What's my carbonate hardness? I care a lot about those, and then ammonia, nitrite, nitrate. You sent a picture with some of the tests, but sometimes it can be hard to tell exactly which test that is. I can kind of guess. I'm guessing the things you left out are at 0, like nitrite and ammonia, but it still helps to see those numbers, just as an FYI. Like anyone I would ever encourage, if you're trying to debug problems in your aquarium, right? You're trying to figure out why X is happening. A logbook is your best friend, and one of the very frequent members of our live streams, shout out to you. I know it's a terrible joke, but I had to. But seriously, one of the things that you has said in the past, and I fully agree with this, especially for people that maybe are dealing with problems, keep a little logbook. Just go buy yourself a cheap journal somewhere, or maybe you keep it in like a Google Doc, whatever. Like you're a tech person like me, you're probably doing Google Docs. But if you like a physical book, keep it in your fish room, wherever your tanks are, and do your tests. And every time you take a test, whether it's with a test strip, an API master kit, I was going to grab my strips because they're all kind of over here, but then I decided not to. What do you want from me? But keep a log of those things. Because what you want to look for is like, oh, if I had like a month where everything was going good, that's when my tanks started looking great, and all of a sudden something shifted, like my nitrates spiked really high, or my pH changed and I saw a dip or an increase. Maybe my TDS or my general hardness increased, and that's when I started noticing problems. These are some of the clues that we can look at. This is from my professional field. This is what we call data analysis, right? Where we're looking at our data to tell us some clues. So I highly encourage everyone, whether it's D here or myself, anyone, keep a logbook. If you're noticing problems, especially if you get them too consistently for your own good, you're noticing like every once in a while, like I have some patterns I know in my fish room to a point where I almost don't have to log them anymore. I know they're just going to happen. Like that black beard algae, it's over there. I'm looking at the froze. There's going to be a short for you guys to watch so you can see what I'm talking about, but I can see the froze waggling in the flow. Froze in the flow, man. Anyway, back on task. Logbooks, your friends. Keep all your stats. Control tank is a 10 gallon with a sponge filter, a Nightcrew light, no substrate, and occasional fertilization. And then there's a bunch of pictures. So here are each of the plants that are of concern. So first we're starting with water wisteria. In the control tank, explosive growth. In the 29 gallon after reset number 2, stems melt at the substrate, very leggy tops. Ludwigia repens. In the control tank, fast growth. In the 29 gallon, healthy after propagation. Minor green spot algae on the older leaves. That's actually a more common problem than you might think. It can be explained typically by an issue in the amount of water flow, because some amount of particulates will gather, then that leads, and they can be particulates that we can't even visibly see, and then that leads to feeding algae. The algae expands and takes over portions of the leaf, or that plant is not actively using that leaf as much, and so that leaf starts to kind of die back, and that's when algae can form. There's some other reasons why this occurs, but that's the two that I've noticed the most. Hygrophila compacta, not in the control tank, but it drops leaves, pinholes without tabs. So if you're using root tabs, no pinholes. Just water column fertilization, getting pinholes. And this is where you might look at like, oh, this plant, for some reason in my tank, is relying more on root feeding than water column feeding. And the water column pinholes, it's not getting enough potassium. So we're seeing some interesting things across all these different stems. Pearlweed, control tank, explosive growth. In the 29 gallon, dark lower leaves, elongates, and uproots. So in general, we're finding problems in the lower portion of the plant. And we're seeing this across all of them, like the water wisteria, substrate melts, or stems melt at substrate. Ludwigia, healthy after propagation, but before propagation, we're seeing problems in the lower portion of leaves. Hygrophila compacta, pinholes, drops leaves. Pearlweed, it uproots itself, darker lower leaves. You got Hygrophila pinnatophyta. You don't have that in a control tank. It's a tissue culture that melted within weeks. Cryptnurii, some S. repens, so Stargine repens, a carpenter, Java fern, and red root floaters. None of these are in the control tank, but they're all stable and healthy within the main tank. There's a number of pictures. We've gone through those. There's a picture of the 10-gallon control tank and the picture of the 29-gallon. Algae present. Blackbeard algae on hardscape, Anubias, and a few pieces of Java fern. Green spot algae on glass and plant leaves, green dust algae on glass. Well, spot and dust algae, kind of the same thing. They're kind of the same monster. I tend to not separate them that much. What that usually tells me is one of two things. Either we've got some little imbalance. We're always going to have some kind of dust or spot algae, just plain and simple. That's always going to be there. It's one of the things we're always going to deal with. But as long as we see minimal amounts of it on our hardscape surfaces or on our glass, that's when we're doing things right. Is when we see it spreading all over the place or like completely taking over hardscape that it becomes a problem. And I actually can show you, like in one of my tanks, it kind of taking over hardscape. But if you'll notice in other, it's not on the plants, and it's not, and this is my tank. Keep that in mind. It's brother-in-law James's tank, the one that you're seeing right now. You can see it all over the hardscape. And some of the glass, but it's starting to die back in the glass, and you can kind of see that, but it's not covering the plants. So it's been minimized, but it did take over portions of hardscape, and that can tell us certain things about what's going on in the tank. In this case, for mine, it's probably just more light than that hardscape actually needs, and I'm not actively taking the time to clean it off or using some kind of live cleanup crew that actively cleans that algae off the hardscape. And I'm okay with that. I don't mind that. Some people that will drive them crazy. So back to it. My issue, the only thing truly bugging me is that my favorite plant, the water wisteria, isn't growing like the water weed I know it to be. In the past, it would take over my tank and look like an underwater forest, which is exactly the look I prefer. And it's a great look. I want to be very clear. I love the way wisterias and similar like water ferns like that can take over a tank. I do it a lot with like Java fern. I mean, obviously we've got it going on here, right? I had to trim this back and take tons of Java fern out of here, and you still like 60% of this tank is just Java fern, and I love the way it looks. I'm not overly concerned with the algae, as I know that will settle once my tank is balanced. At least it will minimize, right? Interesting thing, water wisteria is growing just fine in my bare bottom quarantine hospital control tank. Pick your poison, whichever one you guys want to call it, that I add ferts to when I happen to remember it. No fish, just snails, and some daphnia. What I've noticed, for the most part, my growth issue seems to be with my Hygrophila plants. Water wisteria and Hygrophila compacta are both dropping leaves, with nearly all the water wisteria I've been trying to have mushy stems, no roots at some point. Even the ones that I pull up that have roots are still dropping leaves. My compacta was growing very well at first, but now is dropping leaves constantly and seems to only respond when I place root tabs around their base. My pearlweed, which was growing like a weed in the beginning, seems to be getting darker and less growth. I've increased liquid fertilization and trace minerals, added root tabs, shortened the photo period to combat algae. Then I replaced the light, propagated and replanted stems. I got tired of having to keep replacing water wisteria, which is what led me to start growing in my quarantine tank as sort of a control group in this little experiment. Okay, we've got a lot going on here. A lot. Here's one thing. I want to pull up aquarium plant nutrient deficiency chart. I'm going to pull this thing up. This is one of my favorite weapons to use. I highly encourage pretty much anyone who is having problems to look at one of these charts. And right away, we got a couple of things on the chart. Here it is on my phone. If you thought I was joking, I pull this thing up all the time. Potassium, yellowing leaves, pinholes. Another thing that can cause spots and holes is lack of manganese, which is a trace mineral. But here's the one I want to really look at. Loss of leaves with a darker hue. We're having that in a few of them. That's a phosphate issue. We don't have enough phosphate for some reason. Now, the other thing I can tell you is, in my experience, now I'll put that away, because that's the most obvious one, and usually that's the one that we worry about having too much of and causing algae issues is phosphate. We're observing some phosphate issues with the leaves across all our stems. So clearly we need to figure out a way to get that phosphate up just a little bit. Now, there's ways we can do that. We can pick up the Chem phosphate fertilizer. There's a few other places, like Brightwell has a phosphate supplement. You could also just dose extra micros and get just a microdose like Flourish Trace, Brightwell Florin Multi, etc. to kind of cover that. But here's one thing I want to look at. Some plants, some stems included, when you get over a certain amount of nitrate and you're at 40 to 50 parts per million, this is not normally considered high, but some plants really prefer a super lean amount of nitrate constantly, like 10 to 20 tops. You mentioned in your control tank, you fertilize when you remember to, which means most likely that tank is running a fairly lean amount of nutrients, where the other tank that has the substrate, we're fertilizing regularly, we've got fish in there, we might be getting to a point of where we have too much stuff in the water, and that's actually causing a dieback in some of our plants because it's kind of like, think of it like burning them. That's not what's actually happening, but I want you to think of it that way. It's like you're poisoning the plants. You're not intending to, right? We're thinking, oh, they need more nutrition. We're getting algae. They need to be able to grow better. I need to help them. Some plants do better with lean amounts of nutrition. So this is where I would ask you, and you didn't really tell me, like, you told me you're fertilizing, but not how you're fertilizing. Let us assume, I know it makes an ass out of you and me, but assume that we're probably following the recommendation on Easy Green, which is doing a certain number of pumps once or twice per week. I want you to take that number, whatever that is, and try to spread it out as evenly as possible across the entirety of the week. I want to try and get it to where we're leaning down the amount of nitrates that are in the water, period, and we just have a consistent, like, say, 10, maybe 20 ppm tops. I don't want to see it go in that 40, 50 ppm, because we're gonna do an experiment. In our control tank, we don't have test results for that either. This is that thing where it's not really a control if there's no test results. This is the tester talking. To have a control, we need equal sets of data. We have observations, we don't have data. So this is where I have to make a lot of really vaguely educated guesses, and I want to focus on the vague being me. I'm not a botanist, I'm not a scientist, I'm just a person who really likes planted tanks and has had a reasonable amount of success with them. Okay. I want to try and lean that dose down. I want to spread it so we're getting a little bit constantly. The other thing I want to do, I want you to treat your normal tank like your control tank. Stop planting your stems into the substrate. Get some weights, weight them so they sit on the substrate. Water wisteria, I've had this several times before. Water wisteria is really notorious for this, and some of the Hygrophillas can do this too, where if you plant them right away before they've kind of adjusted themselves to the water, and if they have something that is in the water that bugs them, this can be even harder. But basically put, they just melt from the bottom down. You keep seeing them melt down at the lowest portion. They're not establishing good, healthy roots, which usually, to have good, healthy roots, you also need a reasonable amount of magnesium and calcium. Those are the most two important things for root growth, and then after that you get into some of the micros. We need to probably not reset. We need to change the way we're thinking about how we're fertilizing this tank. And I think and how we're letting the plants establish themselves in this tank. And I think that's our solution. Ignore your control, keep running it so that you have spare plants. Be very clear. Keep running your control so you have spare plants. What I want you to do is change your methodology, because I think what we're having is we're so focused on plants go in soil, oh, problems happening, things are dying, must add more fertilizer. I want to dial that back, let that water get a little more lean. That'll help fight some of that algae too, but also make sure that we're supplying the things we need to supply and giving them an opportunity to convert to this tank when they're put in there. You had trouble with tissue cultures. You had trouble with new plants. Those are things not converting well. When I talked about some of the green spot algae on plant leaves, sometimes that's water flow, but you do have an AquaClear 50, so you're probably moving enough water. The thing you might consider is adding an air stone kind of somewhere. So like if, let's say this is your 29 gallon, right? And your hang-on back sits over here, maybe put an air stone over here to help add a little extra water movement. Maybe move a sponge filter over there. I'm not sure like how much space you have, and when we're looking at here's the picture of the tank, right? We're looking at it. There's got to be some space to like just pluck an air stone. That's why I say air stone over sponge filter, is because we can fit those like in the center of a plant. I've got an air stone right here and another one over here inside my plants in this tank up here, because it helps buffer a little bit of movement and oxygenation, which I appreciate. How do we get to the kind of neutral ground without resetting the tank, without that mentality? Water changes. Do several water changes. I also don't know your water change regime. Are we trying to pull the no water changes whatsoever, the Lucas Bretz method? We trying to pull some other method? I want you to get consistent water, because you've also got that pH thing you're telling me. It's 7 to 7.5. Is that just because it's hard to read the test? Or is that because we're letting it go for a while and it changes over time, and then we finally do a water change and it changes back down over time, right? Those swings are not really going to help us figure out where the real problem is. Here's my steps. Step 1, let's do a couple of good sized water changes. We want to pull a lot of the excess nitrate out. We want to kind of rebalance our KH and make sure that our pH is getting to a stable point. From there, fertilization. We're going to change that. I want you to try and find a way to where you can fertilize a small amount either every day or every other day. Find a way to split your dosing up so that it's less big spike, tail off. Big spike, tail off. I want to see just a nice constant trickle coming in, basically put. And then for the plants that are struggling with their roots, instead of planting them down in the substrate every time, this includes your pearlweed that's having trouble, get a bundle of it, use a weight, use some kind of way to tie it, maybe get it back. If you go buy an extra set of potted plants, leave it in the pot. That's okay, right? You see Corey do this stuff all the time. He'll like plant them in the pot, which I think that's kind of crazy personally. I would just leave the pot on top and give him some time, but let those plants establish some roots free of being choked in by the substrate a little bit. And then after we know that they've converted and they're looking healthy and they have some good roots, now we can plant them in. Or in the case of the water wisteria, it's going to anchor itself down in with its roots. We talked about this with Kabamba a while back. Wisteria does the same thing. So what I've noticed is I weigh it so that it sits on top of the substrate, not in it. And then I let it root itself down in on its own. And when it's anchored all the way, I just remove the weight. Easy peasy, helps the plant do what it wants to do. I would make these combination of changes. I would try to monitor after you've kind of reset, can we get the plants to prevent that die off down low after a month? If we can do that, we know we're on the right path. And as long as those nitrates and things aren't creeping out of control, then I think we've figured out what to do. Now, if you keep seeing issues with the pinholes, or specifically roots just not being able to grow even though we're not putting them in the substrate, that's where I would start thinking about, do we have enough calcium? And that's where we need that kind of general hardness, that calcium, magnesium. These are things that plants really need for healthy roots. And what we might find is that our general hardness is way too low, and our fertilizer isn't providing enough of that. We might need to buffer that with something like crushed coral or something like that to help make sure that these things are present for the plants to establish healthy roots, because even though stems feed mostly from the water column, roots, and sometimes those aerial roots, are the actual secret into how they show you how healthy they are. A stem might feed 90% from the water column, as an example. But if you have a crazy robust root system, when you pull it up, that's how you know that plant is really, really healthy. So we need to start working our way toward that. The other thing we look at, because we have that aquarium co-op light, if this combination of things doesn't help us, if we're still seeing die-off or leaf droppage down low, we might not have that light penetrating deep enough, and even though we're dealing with algae, we might be a little reticent to kind of upgrade the amount of light we're pushing into the tank. We might need to increase the light intensity without adjusting the photoperiod to help make sure that those lower leaves are getting enough light to do their photosynthesis, to be healthy, so that plant goes, oh no, these leaves are healthy, they're doing their job, don't shed them. Because plants will shed them if they're not doing their job and they're becoming more of a cost than a benefit, right? This is how plants keep themselves healthy. If there's something that is taking more than it's producing, they shed those things away to preserve those nutrients and put them toward the portions, that newer growth that is doing all the work. That's it, Dee. I really hope this helps you out. Let me know. I mean, you've emailed me. Sorry for taking a while to get back to you, but again, I've been pretty busy with these things. So let me know, how are things going now? And then start taking those steps and check in with me in, like, I don't know, 2-3 weeks, something like that. Let me know how things are going, maybe a month, whatever it takes. Let's kind of keep checking in, and we'll try and find a way to get you to long-term success. If you have enjoyed this video or you learned something from it, leave a comment down below, consider giving it a like, and if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing. That like, comment, subscribe, these 3 things, absolutely free, and they're literally the best way to tell old Papa YouTube, hey, I like this stuff, someone else might too. It helps our channels grow. It prevents me from ever having to take crazy sponsorships. We don't want to see me like playing Raid Shadow Legends or babbling at you about like how this mattress is the most amazing thing ever when we're a fish channel, right? This doesn't make any freaking sense. So, thank you, all of you, for making it so that I don't have to take sponsorships like that to keep doing what I'm doing. If you need my help, if you need to be a part of Aquarium 911, there's a link in the description below to the original video that tells you all the things you need to do to get an email into me with the details I need to help you in Aquarium 911. I will warn you, I am a bit behind. I'm getting a lot of emails, but I'm going to do my best to answer everyone. Send me an email if you need help. As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.